All right. I'm glad to be here with you guys. I do have some song lyrics on that screen. I think it would be cool if we shifted to either the notes or the PowerPoint, because if you don't want me to start singing, this room will be emptier than it is now. So, all right. If we haven't met, my name is Vasiliy, one of the pastors at GNC here. Super excited to be here with you guys. I know there is not a ton of us here today, but I really just want to thank you for investing this time in learning things so that you could be a better parent, that you can invest into a relationship with your child. And I pray that over time, as we're doing these kinds of events, that you can share with your friends and family and others that this was a blessing to you, and we can impact more and more people that way. But I just pray that God would speak to all of us here today. Now, about my session, this is not going to be a sermon, okay? Today's conference covered a wide variety of topics, right? The very first one, we heard Mark speak, which was a great foundation, how Bible and our relationship with God is really the basis of everything that we do. And so, naturally, that absolutely had to be very, very centered in the Scripture. Today, my session is less of a sermon and more of a practical discussion, if you will, on discipline. And it's a topic I'm probably going to get in trouble with some of you on. I'm pretty sure there will be maybe 10% of you that are going to be pretty not dissatisfied, but not in agreement with some of the things. And I would love to have some conversations with you about. But this is a topic that's dear to me because pastorally, I see it as a big issue. So I'm excited to talk to you about it as parents and as a parent who is figuring things out myself as well. I have 3 teenage kids. I hope you're praying for me. I know that I'm praying for you as parents in general. But we're all trying to figure out this parenting thing, right? And part of that is discipline. Now, I want to be very clear that I don't have all the answers. I'm not a perfect parent, as my wife and my kids will gladly attest to. And I've made a bunch of mistakes myself. So what I'm sharing with you here today is based on a specific book that I most closely aligned with and understand and agree with. And so you might have heard this name. His name is James Dobson. Anybody heard of Focus on the Family? Yeah, it's a really great resource. If you've never looked into it, I highly recommend that you do. James Dobson was a host of Focus on the Family, which is a radio show on over 300 radio stations from 1977 through 2010. So just huge impact. He was on President Reagan's Council for Family Policy. I mean, just absolutely incredible influence into our society here. He has a PhD in child development. He's a believer. He was never ordained as a pastor, but he was referred to at some point as nation's most influential evangelical leader. Now, that's a pretty loud title, especially next to names like Billy Graham and others that have had a huge impact. So, Focus on the Family. James Dobson wrote a book in the 70s called Dare to Discipline. And a couple decades later, 3 decades I think later, he published a revised book called The New Dare to Discipline. And so the first half of that book just talks a lot about discipline within the family, and that is the book that I love. The second half I didn't connect with as much. It talks a lot about teachers actually, and how the education system is raising our kids, and how discipline applies in classrooms. So for those of you who are in the field of education and Sunday school, I think that would be a great read. But the first half really talks about talks about parenting and discipline. And so that's what I want to share with you guys today. My plan of action for the next, how many minutes? Hour, 2, 3. We're still in process. Okay, sorry to put you on the spot. But I'll speak until you tell me I'm done. And then at that point, I'll just say amen. Okay, that's how we're going to do it. 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock lunch. All right. Well, we'll be done before that. We'll maybe have some Q&A for whatever topics you guys want to address. So here's our plan of action for today. Let me see if this works. I want to talk a little bit about what the Bible says. We've already heard about what the Bible says about parenting and specifically about discipline. I'm going to read some Bible verses and we'll make sure that we have that foundation. Then I'm going to share with you 4 common sense principles of disciplines. There are 4 things that people kind of know, but it's important to make sure we all start on the same page. I'm going to talk about 5 reasons why discipline fails, usually. Sometimes parents will come and say, well, I tried this, I did this, and it just does not work. So we'll talk about that. And then I'm going to focus primarily on the law of reinforcement. The law, yes. My OCD is kicking in again. The law of reinforcement. And we'll talk about what that is and how that functions. What is that? How does it work with kids? And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So that's our plan for the session for today. So what does the Bible say about love and discipline? You know, a lot of people really just kind of put these 2 options on the opposite side of the scale and say it's one or the other. There's this dichotomy of saying, well, you either love your child or you discipline your child. And that is just simply not true. I don't know if you've heard this saying or not, but it's a common saying, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's not a biblical quotation, but what is a biblical quotation is Proverbs 13:24 that says, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. What I'm here to tell you is what the Bible says is that it is not either love or discipline. It is not either love or even punishment. It is actually that the primary point of this proverb is that loving discipline actually benefits the child. Loving discipline benefits the child. Parents are sometimes tempted to think that, it's hands-off approach. Let them do whatever they want to do, however they want to do it. But a person or a parent that truly loves their child is going to relay that love, going to demonstrate that love partially through discipline. So discipline is a critical component of showing love to your children. And so if your child develops these evil habits later on in life, like laziness, like dishonesty, even greater evils are going to happen in their lives. We know that from Proverbs chapter 12, 24, 13. This pain of correcting bad behavior later on is going to be much, 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 much worse than if they are getting disciplined as a child by a loving parent with the right motivation, with the right heart. And so discipline is important. That's why the Bible says that if you do not discipline your child, and by the way, we're not just talking about discipline, physical or not physical. We'll talk a little bit about that. But discipline in general. If you do not discipline your child, you don't love them. There is a very key component of love that's missing in your relationship. In order to discipline your child, you must have a relationship with them. You see, there is a very, very cool quote that I want to show you guys. It's on your screen. Here's some key truths about parenting. Rules without relationship are going to lead to rebellion. Josh McDowell said this. It's a beautiful quote that if you are trying to say, here are the rules, this is what you must do, and you provide punishment if you break those rules, but if you have no relationship with your child, what's going to happen? That sooner than later, there is going to be a rebellion from your child towards you because all they're seeing is just rules and no relationship. On the other hand, if all you're doing is relational things, it's all about love. It's all about showing grace. It's all about forgiving them and not setting any kind of structure, no kind of discipline in their life, not disciplining them or showing them the consequences of their actions. What's going to happen is it's going to lead to chaos. And so you have these two extremes. You have the extreme of rules without relationships. There's going to be religiosity in there. There's just going to be a bunch of empty rules and eventually a rebellion. Or you can have a bunch of relational things. I'm just the best friend. I just want them to like me. I just want them to love me. That's what matters. And no rules, no structure, no consequence. It's going to be chaos. You're setting up that child for failure. But in a relationship that has the rules, or rules that are based on a loving relationship and grace with that child, where they respect you because they know that you, as we heard earlier today, are sincere in the way you are with your child and the way you are with others, that you are real, you're not a fake. It leads to respect and responsibility. So rules without relationship will lead to rebellion. Relationship without rules is going to lead to chaos. And I don't know about you, but as a parent, I don't want either. I don't want a child that has no relationship with me, but behaves perfectly well when he is around me. And I also don't want a child who is absolutely great with me personally, but follows absolutely no rules. There is no consequences. There is no structure. And so I want to share this with you because it is important. And the Bible talks a lot about that. You see, we all inherited sinful nature. Therefore, every single one of us needs discipline. In fact, God disciplines us. And Scripture talks about that. God disciplines us, and it is the responsibility of a loving parent to discipline their child. Here's what it says in Hebrews 12:6. For the Lord disciplines the one He loves, and He chastises every son whom He receives. God does it. Why do we think that we should not be doing it? God Himself does it. He disciplines His children. He disciplines you and I. And yet we think we know better than God. We think that our child is going to be just okay. If only I can talk to my child, they will understand it. Friends, it does not work like that. Hebrews 12:10, for they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but He disciplines us for our good, that we may share His holiness. You see, this says that there is a purpose towards that discipline. It's not just for my ego. It's not just because I like a clean house or I don't like a mess in their bedroom. It's not because I want to brag to other parents about how good my kids are doing in school. It is so that we can share in His holiness. That's why He disciplines us. And we teach our kids so that they ultimately learn respect for authority. They would accept the authority of God in their life and they would grow in holiness. That's discipline. Proverbs 3:12, for the Lord reproves or corrects or disciplines him who He loves, as a father the son in whom He delights. In other words, discipline is an expression of love. Discipline is an expression of love. You see, if we spare the rod and spoil the child, as so many of us are tempted to do, there is a danger that the child is going to grow up understanding that there is no consequences in life. This whole mindset, it kind of removes these guardrails, right? There is this, imagine, we have a stairs in the foyer. If people were running up and down those stairs without guardrails, it would be only a matter of time before somebody slips and falls off the stairs. But those guardrails are there to guard them. You see, understanding of your child that there are consequences to my decisions, those are the guardrails that they're following in life and making their decisions. When we fail to discipline a child, we ignore that benefit that discipline is going to give them later on in life. So if you're in sports, for example, right? An athlete, they will go through this training over and over and over and over. I was in the military, right? And so you train, hoping that you won't have to actually fight at some point. But you train and practice before, right? That's what people do. When they go to the Olympics, they didn't just start practicing the day before the Olympics. They've been working up to it all of their life. Discipline is like that. It is something that you work on all of your life. You develop it so that you can realize your full potential here. This rod, this idea of a rod or physical discipline, the idea is this, that small amount of physical pain or small amount of discomfort is going to be something that will benefit the child in forming their behavior. It is a physical corrective measure. And I want to be very clear here. We're not talking about abusive physical punishments of children, right? That's not what we're talking about. Anything that where, many of you are from the Slavic culture, and I think we go pretty heavy-handed with physical discipline, right? So you need to watch that. Anything that leaves permanent marks on the child, or like bruises, or I don't know. I've had a wooden hanger broken on my head one time when I brought a C home back like in 4th grade, right? And I love my parents. There is no judgment whatsoever. I needed it at that time. I remembered that I need to start doing homework in my Russian language and literature after that very, very vividly. But those are excessive things. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about beating your children. We're not talking about doing something that is extreme. We're talking about discipline in general, or some small amount of physical discipline that causes displeasure or discomfort to a child. So I just want to make it very clear that you don't go back and say, well, Pastor Vasiliy said it's okay for me to beat my kid. That's not what we're talking about here. But what we are talking about here is we're talking about providing a structure, a discipline, sometimes physical, depending on the age and the circumstances. And we're going to talk about that. How do I know when it's okay to physically discipline my child versus just taking away some privileges from them? So we'll share some of the things that will make it easier for you to determine that. But bottom line is that the Bible talks a lot about discipline, including physical discipline. God disciplines us as well. And speaking of physical discipline, let's take a look at Proverbs 23:13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with a rod, you will actually save his soul. What? You are going to save your kid from destruction. He's not going to die. And you know what? It sounds rough in today's culture, but think about it. Think about a child or you growing up. Like, how many of you have broken bones in your body? Like, anybody broke anybody? Really? Like, am I the only one? Like, 3 of you? You had too safe of a childhood. Like, really? Okay, whoever fell and held a bruise on their body? Oh yeah, that's better. Okay, I have 2 split eyebrows. If you ever wondered why my eyebrows are like so wide, my kids make fun of me because of that. It's because this one right here, I had a car accident in a cab. I flew from the back. Of course, nobody wears seatbelts in Russia, right? I just flew into the dash. There was in a taxi as we were going to the airport for a vacation. And the second one, I fell on an ice playing hockey and split that up. I have a broken bone in my and my left leg. I mean, anything you can think of. I probably did it as a kid, right? But guess what? I'm alive. Imagine your childhood. A child who touches the hot stove. It hurts, right? You guys gotten blisters before? I've gotten blisters from an iron. I didn't believe my mom that an iron can be hot, and I touched it like that. Very painful. But you can bet I never touched it again. How many of you stuck anything into the electrical socket? Be honest. Did you do it more than once? Yeah, that I would be concerned about. Right? It teaches you a lesson. But if you tell a kid, don't touch this, don't do that, and they do it anyway, they learn from that. You see, discipline is like that too. It causes a certain amount of discomfort, maybe a minor amount of pain even, but they learn through that. That's how kids learn. They learn that, hey, this doesn't feel good. Not at all. I don't want to do that again. If I do this again, it's going to feel the same way. And Proverbs 13:24 says, whoever spares the rod hates his son. If you are withholding discipline from your child, you are hating your kid. And it's not Pastor Vasiliy saying this, it's the Bible saying this. Why is discipline so important? Why is it such a big deal? Well, because it is not a human invention. God put it in place. Proverbs 29:15, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Rod and reproof give wisdom. See, this concept of parenthood, concept of marriage, of parenting, disciplining, not a human invention. God, in His infinite wisdom, He created a family and He put certain principles in place in that family as a unit of reproduction, as a unit of companionship, as a unit of discipling your kids, the next generation. In fact, that's why marriage was created. It's to mutually complete one another, to reflect the image of God, and to multiply the godly generations of kids. That's why you're married. It's not just to pay the bills easier. It's not just to be able to finance a house. You see, parents need to understand that the real change comes from within, right? God changes hearts. You can't save a kid, you can't change his heart, but you absolutely can follow certain godly principles to lead them there so that God would touch their heart and they would respond to that. That's why prayer, daily prayer and supplication on behalf of your kids is so important. Because this task, this mission, it's way too big and way too scary to do on your own. So yes, the Bible talks a lot about discipline. And we're focusing on discipline right now so much because there is a major overabundance of chaos in today's society that we see. There's just no consequences. There is no consequences. And let's talk about that. What are some of the principles that we can see when we're applying discipline, right? So we know it's a biblical concept. Now let's dive in a little bit into saying, well, how does it work? How do we actually apply it to our everyday lives? And again, this is an overview of some of these principles. If you really want to dig into them, I suggest you read the book or we have some follow-up conversations. But here are some 4 common sense principles of discipline that I want you guys to walk away with. The first one is this: respect for authority is a critical part of discipline. In fact, it is one of the goals of discipline is to have respect for authority. If you were to ask me as a pastor what I see the biggest problem with parenting today is, from kids' perspective, I would say it's lack of respect for authority. So what happens is a kid at a young age is allowed to do anything they want. It's all about the relationship, no rules. So they learn that there is no consequences. They are in school, the teachers are not respected, the rules are not respected, you have all kinds of issues. They grow up, they become teenagers, all of a sudden cops are totally evil because they're following the rules. They're making me do something like following the laws. That doesn't work. And then our mayor is bad, our governor is bad, our president is bad. In some cases that might be true, by the way. But there is no respect for authority. And it all begins with lack of respect for parents. You as parents are the model that they see within the family that they are then going to replicate in the rest of their life. You wonder why they don't respect cops, don't respect laws, don't respect the government, don't respect and follow anybody's rules. There is a possibility that they don't respect you enough. Developing respect for parents is a critical component in raising up a child. The most important part of disciplining a child is to gain and maintain their respect. It is important that the child learns to respect parents. Again, not to satisfy their egos, not for you to be a king or a queen in your own family, but to model that respect, that parental authority that God has given you as a parent towards your family, as a father, as a mother. That's going to become a cornerstone of their future. It's important, especially to those parents who are Christian parents, who want to pass on their faith to their kids, to their sons and daughters. What we teach our children about God is a function of how we model it, how we model love, how we model discipline within the family. They learn about God through that. And so the issue of respect is very important in the way parents actually determine how casually or how seriously to treat something. If we think that respect is something that's critical during the parenting process, then that's part of how you make a decision about how much to discipline your kid. So for example, if your kid didn't clean up their room because they got caught up in the act, they were reading too much or playing a game, or they were late from coming from an outing with friends, whatever it is, that would be one level of discipline. But if you tell them to go clean up your room and they say, forget you, what do you think is going to trigger a higher degree of response? What's going to be worse? The second option, right? Why? Because they have disrespected your authority at this point. The authority that you're modeling within the family, the authority that they're going to then use later on in life to build on as a cornerstone. So I would, as a parent, absolutely be much harsher with disciplining a child who questions the parental authority versus somebody who's made a mistake or did something incorrectly or inappropriately. Yes, maybe sinfully. But that respect element is important. When we fail to take charge in moments of challenge, we create this problem for our kids that's going to continue later on. Let me give you an example. I see this a lot. So, a child would be too loud. And parents are having company over. They're having dinner. And kids are messing around. Too loud, yelling, screaming, having fun, whatever. If they're being too loud, they're being children. That's how it is. And if you tell them to be quiet in that particular time, what's going to happen is they will either obey or they're going to blow you off. And so if they refuse your authority at that particular time, that becomes a bigger issue. And so what happens is, I've seen this many times, is what happens is a kid might say, I want a piece of candy, and mom is going to say, no, you can't have candy. The kid starts screaming, and you know what happens? The mom is embarrassed because we have guests over, and you give them the candy. You say, okay, fine, be quiet, be quiet. What? Or a kid starts screaming, and then what happens is you give them a piece of gum. Here's some gum. So what does the kid learn from that behavior? What they learn is that if I yell loud enough and long enough, I'm going to get a piece of candy or some gum. You see, we create these issues. We create these problems. So respect for authority is a huge, huge deal. Don't confuse it with kids misbehaving. Kids are kids. They're always going to be breaking stuff, running things, and those things need to be correcting. But respect for parental authority within the family is absolutely critical. Moving on to the next point. Before we move on to the next point, discipline is not something that's done to a child. It is something that's done for them. So the attitude that we should have as parents is this: I love you too much to let you continue behaving like this. That's an expression of love. I love you too much in order to ignore this issue. And when they get to a teenage age, like I said earlier, here's a great quote: adolescence is a condensation or a composite of all the training and behavior that has gone before. Your teenager is a sum total of their childhood. What they learned, what they modeled, what their sinful tendencies are. As a human, that we all have sinful tendencies, we all have sin in our lives. And so if they haven't been dealt with, if those issues haven't been dealt with in the first 12 years of their life, you can bet it's going to multiply tremendously during their teenage years. Is it too late? Maybe not, but it becomes progressively more difficult. So that was number two, respect. Number one. Number two, it stopped clicking. Can we click to the next slide, please? All right, way too far. Let's go to number two, please. Oh, it works now. Okay, number two. The best opportunity to communicate with your child often happens after you discipline that child. You see, if at that point, after they've been disciplined, that's a great opportunity for you to sit them down and say, I love you. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out why. Let's see how this is working out. Let's see what we're going to do in the future. It is at that moment they're most receptive to you actually discipling them. Because you've just demonstrated to them that this is the authority within the family. This is the person that has the authority to discipline, to raise up, to correct. And now you're continuing speaking to them, but you're doing that in love. You're doing that with respect. They've emotionally vented. They've thrown their tantrum. They got disciplined for it. And now you have an opportunity to connect on a heart-to-heart level. You can explain why they were disciplined. How can they avoid it in the next time? And this communication is often impossible when they're throwing a fit. Their emotions are raging. They're all over the place. So after they've been disciplined, what happens is there's that period of time when you can sit down and you can talk to them about it. Number three, try to control your child without nagging. And what that means is that you have certain responsibility within the family. It's common sense. But if you come up to a child every 30 seconds, do this, 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 that's nagging. That's different from when you actually establish the rules and say, okay, this is the standard. This is how I want you to keep your room. If this room is not clean, I'm going to come at the end of the day and I'm going to come up and there will be consequences for that. So you control without nagging. You control without constantly bringing it up. And listen, don't spoil a child. Don't spoil a child. Now, how do you spoil a child? Anybody knows a difference between flattery and praise? Anybody? What's flattery? When you want to flatter someone, what does that mean? What are you going to tell them? Yeah, you're amazing. You're great. Grandparents do this all the time. Like they haven't seen your grandkid for a long time, right? Or your kid, their grandkid. And they just see them. oh, you're so pretty, you're so amazing, you're so wonderful, you're so smart, you're just number one. See, flattery is different from praise because flattery is unwarranted. Flattery is not tied into a specific performance. It is not tied into a specific event. It is not tied into anything. It's just, you're just number one. And kids grow up through their school careers thinking they're all number ones because they get participation awards for everything. And then all of a sudden they get a job and they show up late 3-4 times a week and they wonder why they're not God's gift to their employer. Because you're not number one. Because you're terrible at math. You need to work on it. So flattery is different. You know, a praise would be appropriate. So for example, let's say you come up to your child and say, listen, I really think you've done a great job drawing this painting. You know, you painted this wonderful. In fact, I love it so much, I'm going to put it on the refrigerator, and I really think you should continue doing that. That's great. Good job. That's praise. That's tied into something specific. They did it. You're trying to reinforce that behavior. You're trying to be positive with them. That works. But if you're saying you're an amazing artist just because you're number one, you're an incredible this, you're the best at everything you do, that is flattery. That is not praising them. That is spoiling a child. Another way to spoil a child is with material stuff. When they get what they want, whenever they want, you're robbing them of the gift of truly enjoying something that they've been waiting for. You're robbing them of the gift of saving up for it and anticipating for it and actually opening that up and saying, yes, I've been wanting this the whole year. This is great. So many parents want to bless their children. We all want to bless our children. But you're robbing your kids if you give them what they want when they want because they have not anticipated it. So those are the 4 basic kind of groundwork principles. Let's move on to some of the reasons why discipline fails. And this happens all the time. People will come up and say, oh, Vasiliy, it's easy for you to say, but I've tried this, 3 times and all of a sudden, it just doesn't work with my kid. Well, listen, it won't work, and the number one reason it won't work is because discipline is infrequent. If you don't do anything for a year or 2, and then all of a sudden you show up in your household and you say, from now on, this is how it's going to be, and you discipline your kid once or twice or 3 times, and then all of a sudden you say, it doesn't work, of course it's not going to work. You haven't done anything for a year before that. Discipline that's inconsistent is going to fail. If you're going to say, listen, if your room is not clean, then you are going to lose your phone privileges, but you don't follow through on that, that's going to mean nothing to them. It's not going to work because you got to follow through. It's got to be consistent. So discipline that is not frequent and it's not consistent is not going to work. Next reason why discipline fails. Some children are more strong-willed than parents. Parents just want to give up. In my previous example of a kid who is demanding something and parents are just feeling awkward, they give in. They don't want a scene at Safeway because their kid says, I want a candy. They said no. They started screaming. Parents are embarrassed. Here's the candy. We'll talk at home. That's not discipline. You're rewarding that kind of behavior. I've shared this story publicly before, so I'll share it again. I'll never forget, we went to Ocean Shores with the family one time, and my kids got into it, and one of my daughters was in the wrong, and I said, apologize to her, and she said, no, I'm not going to apologize to her. And I made a mistake. I said, you're going to stay here by the pool until you apologize. And she said, okay, whatever. And so it's time to go. It's kind of chilly. And now I had a choice. Do I forget on my promise? Or do I stay here with her while the rest of my family goes have dinner? And so there was a battle of the wills there. I don't know, it was like an hour and a half. We sat by that pool. She was in the corner, not wanting to apologize. The rest of the girls were with their mother, having dinner in the hotel room. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, why did I say that? I should have come up with a different discipline. This is terrible. Eventually she apologized, and I said, fine, there are those consequences. We left. But we all have strong-willed kids, don't we? And sometimes it's easier for us to give up and say, fine, I can deal with this. I've had too long of a day already. That's why discipline often fails, is if you give up before your kid gives up. Number 3, the parent all of a sudden starts disciplining a child after doing nothing for a long time. It's very tied into number 1. It's infrequent, it's inconsistent, or all of a sudden it starts and the kid is like, well, it wasn't like that before. And if you have kids, you probably have heard this before. Well, I've always done it like that before and it was fine. You guys heard that before? Maybe just my kids, right? You tell them something, no, I need you. Well, no, you didn't tell me that before. Well, I'm telling you now. And it's going to work, but you got to stick at it for a while. You got to keep going. Number 4, next one, is the discipline is too gentle. Listen, if it doesn't hurt them, not just physically, but if it's not inconvenient to them, it's not discipline. If you're telling them, listen, you are disciplined, you're not doing what you're supposed to, I'm going to take your phone away for 15 minutes, that doesn't hurt. That does absolutely nothing. It's not painful. It's not painful enough for them to motivate them for anything. So some of your discipline is too gentle. And I'm not just talking about physical consequences. I'm talking about consequences in general. We can have a conversation on the physicality of it. But bottom line is that it's got to cost them something in order to motivate some of that behavior. And number 5, wrong kind of discipline is applied. There are some cases, there are some individual situations where you shouldn't apply certain type of correction to certain type of kids. If your kid is hyperactive and has a type of disorder or a medical condition of some sort, and you're applying the wrong kind of physical discipline to them, that might make things just worse. So you got to know your child. There is no one rule that applies to every single one. I have 3 daughters, and I can tell you they have 3 different buttons I need to push in order to motivate them. They each have their own personality. They each have their own weaknesses. They all have their individual personas. They're unique. And so they struggle with different things. Some of them are more disciplined, some are less disciplined. Some of them, I can just say, don't do this again, and I raise my voice a little bit, and that's it. It's tears, I'll never do it again, I'm so sorry. And the other one will stand, for an hour and a half in a corner of a pool, not wanting to apologize. They're different. All kids are different like that. So wrong kind of discipline being applied is often why discipline fails. There is a concept in law of reinforcement, and law of reinforcement is the last thing I'm going to cover before we move to a Q&A, since time is going by quickly. You may have heard of positive reinforcement. I think in Russian it's подкрепление, укрепление. I'm not sure how to interpret that. I hope our interpreters do. But you guys heard that before? Yes? No? Few of you? So positive reinforcement is when you do something and you want that kind of behavior and say, good job. But listen, it's more complex than that. That doesn't always work. It is one of the most effective ways to reinforce behavior, but it doesn't always work like that. There is actually 4 different categories of behavior and how you condition or how you respond to certain things. So there is positive reinforcement when you give a reward for good behavior. Oh, good job, you cleaned your room. Here's a piece of candy. Here's a piece of chocolate. Oh, you behaved in the classroom today. Here you go. There is a star for you. There is a sticker. Then there is negative reinforcement. Like, for example, negative reinforcement would be, well, you behaved well today, so you're no longer disciplined. Or you've done your homework for the day, therefore you can have your phone back. That's also reinforcing. You're reinforcing by removing something negative out of their life. And then there is punishment side of things. There is a positive punishment where you're spanking them. You're spanking them if they misbehave. So you are punishing them. And then there is a negative punishing. So, for example, you take away a favorite toy for poor behavior. So whenever you're talking about disciplining a child, you're talking about a different combination of these things. And some of them work better than others, but all of them have a place in the disciplining process of your kid. Not only do you have different types of reinforcements and how you work with discipline with your kids, but also what matters is how frequently or when you do it. When you do it. And so again, you have this matrix there on the screen, and so there's this schedule of reinforcement. The one is a fixed ratio. What does that mean? Ratio means that you you do it a certain amount of times, and then I'm going to give you this. So for example, if you clean or keep your room clean for 7 days in a row, you are going to get XYZ, right? So there is a fixed reward on a specific ratio. You do something X amount of times, here's what you get. That works, but there is many different variations of that. There is something called fixed interval. What does that mean? That means that if you do this, the explanation here says reinforcement given after a fixed period of time if action is completed. For example, if you maintain your grades for 30 days in school, then you get this. Then there is variable kind of schedule where, hey, if you do a good job in school, I'm going to give you this. Well, 1 week it might be 3 times that you've gotten A's. Next week it might be 2 times. It's variable. It's not consistent. And then there is interval, right, where reinforcement is given after varying periods of time if action is completed. Why am I breaking this down? Because you need to understand that there are different ways and different times to provide rewards to your kids. And different kids react to things differently, and different ways work a little bit differently. So for example, statistically, what seems to work best, statistically, your kid might be different, is when you are consistent with your rewards to get the desired behavior, and then you do it randomly after that to maintain it. So, for example, hey, you're struggling with school, here's a motivation. Every time you don't get anything less than an A this week, we're going to go out for ice cream with the family. That's the motivation. We're going to spend some time together, have ice cream. So you do that every single week, and then 3-6 months later, you say, you know what? As long as you do well in school, we're going to go to ice cream occasionally. And so what happens is now you're no longer doing it every week. Now you just do it randomly. It's a variable interval. So you need to think about these different rewards and behaviors and how you reinforce certain behavior. So law and reinforcement. Here are some very practical things you need to be aware of. Rewards must be given out quickly. Rewards must be given out quickly. If you don't reward your child after promising them the reward, it's going to disappear. In fact, that's one of the reasons capitalism works and communism does not. Is because in capitalism, you work, you get paid, you work, you develop your business, you're able to afford some things. In socialism or communism, doesn't matter if you work hard or if you don't work hard, the reward is exactly the same. That's why communism and socialism are destroyers of motivation. That's because nobody really is motivated to do anything. And by the way, paying your children, there is a difference between bribes and rewards. So this is not the law, but what we do with our family, for example, is we expect our kids not to get paid for anything that's part of their household chores. You live in this family, you have certain amount of responsibilities. That means garbage can needs to go out every Sunday night, and it needs to go back in every Monday night. However you 3 rotate, that's how it is. It's your responsibility, right? So household chores, that's on them. But if, for example, we have an RV, right? And so we rent out that RV, and part of the RV rental process is it has to be cleaned. And so we say, listen, this is a family business. We rent out an RV. We charge the people to clean it. If you want to, we can hire you to go clean that RV after each rental. And so one of our daughters goes and she cleans the RV and she gets paid extra for it because that's not part of her regular household chores. That's how she gets a reward. That's how she gets additional motivation instead of going and working somewhere else outside. So what I would suggest is don't give your kids bribes. Again, hey, if you're quiet, I'm going to give you a candy. That works. But stop yelling, I'm going to give you a candy. That doesn't work. Why? Because that kid is going to know that I'm going to yell so that my parents are going to give me a candy so that I would stop. It doesn't make sense. You're rewarding this wrong kind of behavior. Next item. Rewards don't have to be material. It's not just about money or stuff. It could be a behavior they really like. It could be going for a walk if that's what they're into. They could be going to see a favorite movie with them. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be material. Don't spoil your kids with material stuff. And most importantly, this number 2, it could be just verbal. You could just give them a reward because everybody wants to be appreciated and loved and acknowledged. And so if you acknowledge them doing a good job, that's their reward. You're reinforcing that behavior. Good job on cleaning that room. Hey, fantastic that your homework's been kept up for the past 3 weeks and you're not late on anything and you're getting A's. Hey, good job on keeping your car clean. Or, hey, I really appreciate you helping mom out without being told to. That was really good. So you reward them, and it doesn't have to be with money. You don't have to take your wallet out and say, here's $100. Talk to them. Number 3, behavior learned through reinforcement is gone if reward is taking too long. Now listen, anybody heard of elephant rope? Has anybody been to a circus before? Has anybody seen an elephant before? All right, are you guys awake? All right. So if you were to go to a circus and see an elephant, you would see an elephant tied in with a rope that looks very, very, very tiny. Have you ever wondered why the elephant never breaks that rope and runs away? Because what happens is when they're trained, they have this huge chain tied into this big concrete block, and they get taught that if I am tied up, I cannot leave outside of the circle. And they get trained and they get conditioned. It gets into their head that if I have something on my foot, I cannot leave this circle. And then later on, once that chain is removed and the concrete block is gone, and they have a tiny stick, like a stake in the ground, and a tiny rope, they still don't leave. They have an experiment where a pike, I believe in Russian it's shuka, right? So they placed a big pike in this big tank and put a bunch of small fish in the second half of the tank, and they separated it out with a glass wall. And so the pike, it eats other fish and it's hungry, and it would go and it would just slam against that glass separator. And over time it would learn that that fish is not available. I can't eat that fish no matter how hard I try. I go after it, I get smacked on the head, I can't do it. And what's amazing is when that glass is removed and the fish is swimming around the pike, it actually starves to death because it is conditioned that it cannot eat that fish. That's what we do to our kids. Now, our kids are not animals, they're not fish, but there are certain psychological behaviors that happen when we condition our kids, when we reward them. So there's this reinforcement principle that if we wait for too long or if we do something over a period of time, it's going to disappear. Number 4, parents are also subject to reinforcement. Your kids train you. It's not just you training your kids train you. And they are masters at it. They are awesome at it. They know that if mom said no, but they come up to dad and give him a hug and a kiss, then he might say yes. They know that if they scream long enough, parents might give up and give in what they want. They know that when parents are having dinner with guests downstairs and the kid went upstairs to sleep, if they yell long enough, parents might come back and say, okay, this one time only is an exception, you can stay up. You know what they're going to do next day? Same thing. Because they know they can get away with it. They're conditioning you. They're training you. Same way. They're masters at it. Lastly, parents often reinforce bad behavior and discourage the behavior they actually want. Already used these examples. You're yelling. Here's a piece of candy. Just be quiet. You are reinforcing the behavior of a kid to yell and scream by giving him a piece of candy. So, those are the laws of reinforcement, friends. We're out of time. Got 2 minutes, but I want to show you some resources, just a couple of websites that I really like. One is focusonthefamily.com, and the other one's lifeway.com. Lifeway is a publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. They sell really good books and resources. Sometimes I'm hesitant to recommend websites where you can buy stuff because you never know what's being sold on there. And these guys are solid. They won't, you won't find anything heretical on there. So that's it. I hope this is useful. Again, this is just a general, very quick overview. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I recommend you read a book. And if you have any questions, you can scan the QR code and go from there.
There's two questions, but один вопрос, он довольно, он уже был объяснен, поэтому...
Про кальвинизм.
И про армянство, да. Should kids get a financial allowance? How important is it? And if it, how much money should they get, especially if the family is tight on budget?
Yeah, well, I briefly shared it with you guys. Bible doesn't say your kid shall get an allowance. It's not part of the 10 Commandments. It's not in the New Testament for sure. But what we do with our family is we've given a small allowance to our kids, but we also have a social contract with them in place to where you have to keep straight A's in school, you have to keep up on all of your homework, you have to be engaged at church and do whatever you need to do with the gifts that God has given you. If you do that, we're going to take care of your expenses. If you don't do that, then we're not taking care of your expenses above and beyond that. So there is a small allowance, but we don't pay for, hairstylists and nails and all the other girly things that girls do. That's on them to actually make some money. How much that is, incomes are different, circumstances are different, kids are different. So I would err on the side of less than more. That would be my personality, but I can't tell you an amount. That's up to you. So should they get an allowance? We give them an allowance just so that they can buy a stick of gum when they're with friends or buy a cup of coffee when they need to. But anything above and beyond that, it needs to be a conversation or they need to earn that money.
Okay, come back to rod in the Bible. Rod in the Bible means a rod that shepherd used to guide and protect the sheep, but never to harm the sheep.
Yeah, so that's exactly the point I was trying to make earlier, is that the Bible verse I've read earlier that says that if you apply the rod, you're not going to hurt your child. You're not going to hurt your child if you discipline them. Just like they're not hurt because they stumbled and realized that there is something over here, there is a step, and next time I'm going to be careful and step over it. You can't say that they've fallen over that step and therefore you've hurt them with it. It's not hurting when your employer demands that you show up at work at 8:30 every morning. It's not hurting when you're telling your kid that there is a consequence for your actions of if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen. So again, if we're talking about beating and excessively applying physical discipline, then yes, that would be absolutely right. And you got to remember, the goal of physical discipline is not to create punishment. It is to correct certain behavior, to provide an incentive for certain behavior. A 5-year-old kid, you cannot sit down and reason with him all day long. They just won't understand it. They will understand dad or mom is unhappy, and they'll understand that if I get spanked on the butt, then that doesn't feel good, so I shouldn't do it again. But as they grow up, your role as a parent changes. Now you're teaching them, you're explaining why that's important, and the older they are, the more capable they are in processing it, the more of that conversation you have, and at some point, you don't even make them do anymore. You say, listen, I'm here to give you advice. You're an adult person making those decisions. Now I'm here to support you and give you advice, and you respect your parents by listening to my advice, sometimes agreeing, sometimes disagreeing. But if I'm 45 years old, which I am right now, I don't listen to my mom every single time she tells me, right? I don't have to obey to her every single time. My wife. Yeah. Yes, honey. Right? But why? Because I'm at a different stage of life. Same thing with your kids. When the younger they are, the more unquestioning obedience you can expect from them. The older they get, the more explanations you make. The older they get, now it's here's my advice to you, you make the decision. So your role changes. If you are trying to have a 20-year-old who is obedient to you in every single element of their life, you're not teaching them how to do life. You're not teaching them how to make any kind of decisions, and that there are consequences there. And that's just as bad if you give a 7-year-old all kinds of decisions. I mean, it blows my mind, but there are families that don't go to church because their 7-year-old kid didn't want to get up that morning and go to church. What? You better be in the car by the time I make it there. Like, you better be quick. You better be ready. So the Bible very clearly talks about physical discipline. So when it's talking about the rod, it's not just talking about an instrument of guidance. It is talking about physical discipline as well.